Everyone knows that the Bible has as its underlying principle the absolute sanctity, the devotion to the sanctity of life. So much so that you can violate just about any Torah prohibition to save a life, except by idolatry. You can't save your life by bowing down to an idol or accepting a false deity, which is why Jews in the Middle Ages preferred to be burnt at the stake or to commit suicide rather than accept Christianity for themselves. The belief that a human being and God are two of three that make up a trinity, and somehow or other this is one, for Jews is idolatrous. And we would rather fight than switch, to quote an old Tareyton commercial. But at the same time, for everything else, Yom Kippur, the sanctity of the holiest day of the year, does not stand in the way of saving a life. Even the doubt of saving a life, you're supposed to violate Yom Kippur or Shabbat. Or if the person needs food, you provide the person with whatever food is there, even if the food is non-kosher, because the sanctity of life is paramount. And yet you see that there are elements within the Torah that seems to contradict or doesn't promote the sanctity of certain lives. For example, if a person is a murderer, you can't buy him out. You can't commute his sentence from death to exile or to prison. Person deserving of death for murder has to be killed. Which brings us to the concept, the political embroilment behind the commutation by the president of 37 murderers who were on death row, commuted their sentence from death to life sentence without the possibility of parole. And left-wing reporters hailed this as an act of heroism, of bravery. I don't know how much bravery is required for a president to commute a sentence. The fact that he was against capital punishment, because it's been shown that often or sometimes people can be arrested, maybe the wrong people, and they be executed despite the fact that other people committed the crime. That happened to our people, that happened to a very famous case in Georgia, South, where a Jewish boy was accused of the murder of a young Christian girl. The real killer was a colored man who testified against him. And this person was hung, and I believe he might have even been strung up by vigilantes. Almost 100 years later, he was exonerated. So this happens. This happens that you get the wrong person, and the wrong person is killed. But in most of these cases, these 37 cases, the evidence has to be so overwhelming to cover the guidelines in order for them to get a jury to convict these people There had to have been overwhelming evidence. And some of the cases were heart-rending. Victims were young, innocent, murdered by adults who couldn't care less. And so we have to examine this idea that somehow or other there is a movement to prohibit capital punishment from being exercised by our institutions. But it's amazing. The very people who want to end capital punishment are the same people, for the most part, are the same people who promote abortion on demand. So this is a contradiction. You're willing to kill an innocent baby, unwilling to kill a murderer who's been convicted. And the question is, why is this happening? The answer is we all have compassion. We all have compassion, and the compassion is directed for people who deserve compassion. You see a person on the street and they're in tatters, and they have a sign that they're hungry. Well, if I had food, I would give them food instead of giving them money, because that way, if they're really hungry, they would have food. If all they want is money for drugs, then I haven't fed their evil desires. At the same time, I usually don't have a sandwich, so I give them some money. Why do I give them money? Because it appears that they're deserving. They deserve compassion. It's not easy asking for money. And certainly staying on a corner in the cold, sometimes a little bit underdressed, you can see most of the time that these people really, truly deserve it. So we have compassion for people who don't have what we have. And it doesn't mean we have to have a lot. If you have a sandwich and the other person doesn't, then half of your sandwich would go a long way and would show that you're truly a kind person. That's compassion. Having compassion for a snake that wishes to murder your family because the snake is crying is not compassion. And in fact, the Talmud tells us that those who have compassion for the cruel will ultimately have cruelty to those that require compassion. And that's exactly what exists over here. We're worried about the lives of murderers, people who took the lives of young, innocent people. They might have raped them, and when they finished, they killed them. Those people don't deserve compassion. Oh, they've learned the error of their ways. No, they haven't. The only thing that they're sorry about is they got caught. Some of them may have learned the error of their ways, but that's irrelevant. The halacha, if you want to know what the halacha says, what Jewish law says, is that we ask of the killer before we execute him. Ask for forgiveness. Confess your sins before God and ask God for forgiveness. And if a person is truly, sincerely asking God for forgiveness, God may forgive his sin. Yet we still kill him. We still execute him. Even if Elijah the prophet would come down, even if God Almighty would come down and say, this man is contrite, he's really, truly sorry, there's still is the law that we must execute him. And the reason is that this doesn't have anything to do with whether or not the person regrets what they've done. It is justice. It is just that the killer of others who could have lived and had a productive life should have their lives ended as well. It is just. It is fair. It is a proper verdict. But it is an improper verdict to end the life of somebody who potentially could bring goodness into this world. The fact that the child is inconvenient, the fact that the mother hates the father, or that the mother doesn't want to be impeded with having to deal with a mouth to feed, is not good enough of a reason to end the life of a living fetus. A fetus is similar to a person on life support. Would you kill somebody on life support? 9 out of 10 of you, 99 out of 100 of you would say, of course not. Well, why would you support abortion? Abortion is the same thing. There's a patient in a small hospital room, hooked up to life-giving systems that support that life. And unlike most people in a hospital who are under life support, who have very little chance of survival more than a few weeks or a few days, this living entity, if allowed to continue, will live for 70, 80, 90 years. So what right do you have to end that person on life support's life? It may be inconvenient, so that doesn't give you a right to kill. It may not be wanted. So there's a way out of that. Children can be given up for adoption. There are hundreds of thousands of couples living in the United States right now that cannot have children. Some of my relatives couldn't have children. Some people don't get married till it's too late for them to have children. Or they for some reason or other, couldn't have children. And they would love to adopt a child. Why should we assume that the child will not have love or life? I believe that Benjamin Franklin was one of 15 children, might have even been an illegitimate child. The famous vice president, the secretary of the Treasury, was on the $10 bill, was born out of wedlock. There are many people born out of wedlock that had illustrious lives. Given a chance, they made life better for the rest of us. So when you have cruelty to the compassion, those who deserve compassion, you will wind up having compassion to those that are cruel. It's geschrieben. So it does not surprise me that the president would commute their sentences, because this follows what the Talmud actually says. If you have compassion to the cruel, you will be cruel to the compassionate, to those who deserve compassion. So this has to be seen in the idea, in the context of sanctity of life. We hold life sacred for those who deserve life, or for those who hold and practice the sanctity of life. We sanctify the lives of those who have never violated the sanctity of life of others. But when somebody violates the sanctity of life of somebody else, then all bets are off. His life or her life is no longer sanctified because they have violated the sanctity of life. They do not hold life to be sacred, therefore their lives are not sacred. If you murder someone, included in that is if you violently attack a woman, under certain circumstances, the person who does that can be killed because that person doesn't care about the sanctity of life. Means that we care about others. We care about the feelings of others. We care about the consequence of our actions to others. A rapist, killer, somebody that destroys the lives of children, shows that they have no sense of the sanctity of life. And if you don't have a sense of sanctity of life, then your life is not sacred either. If you violate the sanctity of life, then your life is also not sacred. You can't have it both ways. Those murderers deserve to die because they violated the sanctity of the life of others. And that gets us to this horrific murder of Mr. Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, by a deranged person who has no real scruples, no real sense of clarity of morality. I don't care how cute the man is. He could be the ugliest person in the world. In fact, spiritually, he's the ugliest thing there is. Even if Hitler was the handsomest man in the world, the cutest man in the world, had the nicest smile, he didn't. He was an ugly, horrible man who thought he was hot. Hitler deserved to be killed. Anybody who would have taken out Hitler would have done the world a favor, because he had no respect for the sanctity of life. The first people Hitler killed were children who had emotional or mental problems. I think about 100,000 of them were killed in Germany in the 1930s. Before, he killed the brown shirts, he killed Rom, but before he started killing other people, he killed German children who were born to their parents, whose parents loved them, they loved life. They had no crime, they didn't do anything wrong. They had emotional problems. They might have had some psychological problems. So they were disturbed kids. Therefore, they didn't deserve to live, because he didn't want them around. They were imperfect specimens, and they were like vermin. They were eating for no reason. That was the directive of Hitler. Hitler had no sense of the sanctity of life. Because he had no sense of the sanctity of life, he violated the sanctity of life, and he got others to do the same. And a person like Hitler and those who supported Hitler, there is no compassion in keeping them alive. And so when they bombed the cities of Dresden, yeah, a lot of innocent people might have gotten killed. But those were the industries, those are the cities whose children and whose menfolk supported the military, industrial, political entity that was the Nazis, that murdered 20 million people and caused the deaths of up to 100 million people in World War II. It was tragic for them, yes, but it was the moral thing to do. You had to get rid of the Nazis. And yet those people had no qualms destroying the cities of the Nazis or in the United States, destroying the Japanese cities in order to end World War II. About 350,000, 400,000 people were killed as a result of the two bombs. And yet, it is considered justified because it ended the war. And just because civilians die doesn't mean that it lacks the feeling of sanctity of life. Sometimes the sanctity of life requires that you do things that are violent in order to prevent further violation of the sanctity of life. You have a tyrant and you have evil people who want to kill other people. You have to get rid of them. In the process, you have to sometimes hurt other people that are, standing on the side. But because these people violated the sanctity of life, there is no sanctification of their lives. And that, my friends, is the relationship between the policies of commuting the sentences of murderers and allowing abortion on demand, and their parallel in the Israeli Hamas conflict. The victims were attacked on October 7th. The IDF is trying to defeat and eradicate the ones who performed this and are dedicated to doing it again and again. Those are groups that wish to kill again and again and again. Make no mistake about it. It's not just that they want to kill Jews. They want to kill all the West. Bethlehem is almost a ghost town. Of course, a lot of it has to do with the war, but the truth is, Bethlehem at one time was 85% Christian. Today it's less than 15% Christian. What happened to the 70% that used to occupy Bethlehem? The answer is the Muslims chased them out. The Muslims hate Christians. Christians can't officially say that, so they say other things. There are millions of Christians that are being murdered in Africa, all over the continent of Africa. Nobody says anything. Are their lives not sacred? The answer is that the media portrays Muslims as victims. They're not victims. If they would lay down their arms, there wouldn't be a single Arab killed in Israel today, or in any of the other adjoining territories. If the Jews laid down their arms, they would all be murdered and slaughtered. So who protects the sanctity of life and who's against it? It's obvious. But the ones that protect and promote the agenda of the Hamas and the Hezbollah and the Houthis in Iran are the same people who would commute murderers but allow abortion on demand and support anti-Semitism and support the ostracizing of the Jewish state and the 7 million Jews who are survivors of over 2,000 years of pogroms, annihilation, rapes, robbery of the worst kind. Apartheid? Most Arab countries are Judenrein. Why are they Judenrein? There were Jews there from time immemorial for the last 2,000 years. You got to ask yourself, why are there only 40,000 Jews left in Iran? There should be millions. Why are there almost no Jews in Iraq? There should be at least 1 million today. Why are there no Jews in Syria? Why are there no Jews in Lebanon? Why are there no Jews in Egypt? You know why? They were chased out. And all of the money that they had, all of their assets were confiscated. That's apartheid. That's the part of the worst kind. Ethnic cleansing and the robbery of the assets of those who you've cleansed. And all of you who are supporters of Hamas probably are supporters of commutation of murderers. Probably also agree with abortion on demand. But that's not the sanctity of life.